Hi, this is Allen Mendenhall, publisher and editor-in-chief of Southern Literary Review. I'm here today with Shuly Cawood to talk about her new book, which is A Small Thing to Want. It is a collection of short stories. And Shuly, I have to say, I was at first reluctant to pick up the book because I liked The Going and Goodbye so much that I had high expectations. And I knew that Going and Goodbye was memoir. And I thought, well, surely she can't possibly write at the same level about relationships if she didn't experience them personally. But I was so wrong. You are a powerful writer. I don't know how
Thank you.
you write about love and deep human connection more powerfully than anybody else. It's as if you've experienced every kind of relationship possible and just have this uncanny ability to render it in prose. I don't know how you do it. How are you able to come up with these characters who are struggling with relationships or, either on the verge of joy or despair? There's just such a fine line when it comes to falling in love, and you just capture these relationships so well. How do you do that?
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you saying that. I've been working on this craft for a while now, and it did not come as easily as memoir. And I'd also been working on memoir before I came out with The Going Goodbye, I'd probably been working on memoir for 10 years. So this was a very different genre for me. I always say that stories start with a kernel of truth. It does not mean that I've experienced all these stories at all, but there is usually some part that's true, whether it starts with an idea of something from my life, or the setting is from my life, or I know somebody who might have lived something similarly. I think it helps that I really love observing people. I have my whole life been really interested in people and relationships. When you see a couple at a restaurant, I'm the one watching them. I'm watching their body language. I'm trying to eavesdrop if I can to figure out where they are in their relationship, if they're new, if they're on the verge of breaking up, if they've been married 50 years. So I'm just fascinated by people. And I think because I watch people so carefully, I'm able to hopefully put them into stories well.
Well, that's somewhat intimidating. It's almost as though you're a psychic or something. It's really, really remarkable. And not just how you're able to render the relationships, but how you're able to capture the feelings that characters would have, and their feelings that anyone who has ever been in love, which is probably any adult, would recognize. And I'm thinking the character Alice Barrington in the opening story, where you open up with the digging scene, and it reminded me of this curious mix of kind of Seamus Heaney and Robert Frost. I'm thinking Mendenhall. I love the description when you say her face contains a dusting of freckles, dots on a treasure map. That was a nice little a nice little touch. But Alice and Dale, the nervousness they exhibit when they're sitting next to each other to drink a beer, you can almost sense that tension between them. And then in Bag of Boots, there's this love triangle story. I'm curious where the emotional power of that story comes from in Bag of Boots. There's a sense of sort of, I don't know if the word's possessiveness, that comes when people have an intimate, physically intimate relationship. Something about the story reminded me of the movie Closer. I don't know if you remember that movie with Julia Roberts and Jude Law, Natalie Portman, and Clive Owens. But do you know what
I
I'm
don't remember it very well, but I do recall that it existed.
Well, I'm curious, what makes that particular relationship so powerful?
I guess I think people are very layered, and I think when you can render a character, bring out the complexity of their emotions, of their character, but then also the layers of how they feel about each other. I think usually how we feel about another person is not simple. unless you don't know them very well. Usually if we know somebody well, there are things that are negative and positive about the relationship, things that repel us, things that attract us. And so I hope that what made it powerful is that the characters are multidimensional and that you see the layers in these relationships. They're not simple. I wish life were simpler, but they're not. And actually the complications are what make them interesting. So
That's exact. I mean, that is so true. The complications are what make the mix of emotions so powerful as a reader, just coming at it, and really every character in each story is so different, but they're all struggling with human relationships. It's amazing. There's really an infinite range of possibilities when it comes to human relationships and what people are dealing with. Your story, The Snowstorm, which I loved, involved Seymour and Flavia, and this story has a Latina character in it. And tell us why that was important to you.
I have a mother who's Mexican, so I'm half Mexican, and my upbringing, I think, was shaped by that. And so I wanted to make sure that my characters were reflected in that. So I have a couple of, at least 3 Latino characters throughout my collection, all very different. And yeah, that story, I did not grow up with 2 parents who were Latino. I grew up with 1, but definitely the love that her mother has for her and the caring and worrying is definitely reflected in my own mother. She was very much entrenched in making sure that my sister and I were okay and loving us. And so I hope that that got rendered with the mother character, who is a very minor character in that story. It's not really about her.
Did you begin writing when you were a child? When did you start writing? I mean, obviously not professionally, but when did you become interested in writing or think of yourself as a writer?
I started writing stories when I was very, very little. I mean, when I could just barely draw. My father is a writer, and he used to make these little, he used to take pieces of paper, cut them up, staple them together, and make little books for me and my sister, and we would make drawings and little stories. And by junior high, I was writing short stories, but I was really terrible at them, but I thought I was fantastic, which is good for a kid to not know how terrible they were at writing. But I did get encouraged by a junior high teacher. She thought not my stories, but my essay writing was good. So I kept on my way, and I really turned to poetry in high school, kept writing poetry, didn't really come back to short stories until recent years. I was actually in my MFA program working on my memoir and studying memoir and creative nonfiction. And there was a summer between my first and second semester when I was supposed to be focused on drafting my memoir. And I felt really stuck with truth, sticking to truth. And I thought, I just want some freedom to write about whatever. So I started writing short stories because they didn't have to be about my life. They didn't have to be true. And I really got interested in writing fiction again. So I actually wrote the director of my MFA program and said, can I study fiction too? And you had to apply. So I had, he said, go ahead and send in your work, which were these terrible little short stories that I'd written that summer. And he said, they're not really great, but I'll let you in the program and you can learn. And I had a great, great education there at Queen's University. That's what started my education. And then I kept just learning after my MFA to keep writing stories. So I've been interested in writing pretty much my whole life.
I want to ask you about your knack for dialogue. I'm thinking of Nathaniel and Octavio having a conversation and trying to grow, and they have such a macho conversation, a macho man conversation. How did you come up with that? I mean, how are you able to, know what that would sound like?
Thank you so much for saying that you liked my dialogue. I actually find dialogue to be easy. A lot of people find it hard. Other things that people find easy, I find hard, like details and setting I've really had to work on, but dialogue has really come easy to me. The characters just speak in my head, even though I'm not like them. It's kind of strange, but because they have a life of their own, I just listen to what they're saying. And I think because I've listened in and eavesdropped on people and been paying attention to people my whole life and listening, I think that's probably helped me write dialogue.
It's interesting that you say that, because I can't even recall what the exact setting was in, for example, The Snowstorm, other than, one character is driving from DC, but it's almost in some ways an advantage because it could be anywhere. He could have been anywhere within driving distance as long as it would be, winter. And so the importance of a lot of your stories really isn't so much the setting, because it is the human relationships. And I think you're able to write about something that's even more important than location. When the way you detail the interactions between characters and really reveal what they're feeling without saying what they're feeling. You just show it. And as a reader, I know I came at it and I knew exactly how the different characters felt without your having to spell it out for me. And that was
Oh, I'm
really
so
impressive.
glad. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really that means a whole lot to me. I'm glad that it was, you could feel it, because I didn't want to tell people. I always say when I teach my writing classes, it doesn't help to tell the reader she's angry. That doesn't make the reader feel anything. I said you have to show it in a lot of different ways. So I'm glad that that came through in my own writing.
Well, tell us what you're working on now. I'm confident that you are continuing your projects and working on new things.
I am. So I have a poetry collection that's coming out in the spring, summer, with Mercer University Press. I was very lucky. I won an award for it, and it's coming out. But I'm working on a second collection now of poetry, and I'm working on a second short story collection. And some of the stories are just standalone stories, but I have actually started, I started with one story that was about 7 college roommates, or housemates, they weren't roommates, housemates that lived together. And I lived with a bunch of housemates, but they're not the same characters, but I did live in a house full of good friends when I was in college. And so I started out with these characters, and the first story was about one main character primarily, and then a couple of the other housemates filter in. Well, now I've started to write other stories that are about those housemates, and it's not usually set in their college years, although one is. It's usually, it goes back and forth in time. And so I don't know how many stories I'll get out of that collection, but right now a few of them are linked. So that's been interesting to me.
You've done memoir, you've done fiction, you're doing poetry. Do you have a genre that you prefer? I mean, which one do you, or does it just kind of like, do you go through phases?
I think I go through phases, and if I get blocked in one, I just skip to another. I think
That's nice.
poetry is the one that is probably, I'm going to say it's easiest for me because I've been doing it the longest. I'm not saying I write great poetry or that it's the best for me, but when I get really stuck, it's easy for me to jump back into it just because I'm so used to writing. I'd have been writing poetry since I was about probably 13. So I just, it's my go-to genre, but it's not my favorite. They're all my favorites in different ways. They all allow for different things.
Well, if I could be anything in the world, it would be a good poet. However, I'm not that. I truly wish I could be a good poet. If I could just choose anything, that would be what it is. But unfortunately, that's not the gift I got. So I really look forward to reading your poetry collection. And we publish, or review, I should say, many books by Mercer University Press. They do a great
Nice.
job. They
Oh,
really
good.
are fantastic. So I look forward to doing something with that. And I'm probably your biggest fan. I would challenge
Thank you, Alan.
any viewers of this interview to a duel when it came to who's a bigger fan, because your writing is fantastic. And as I mentioned, I truly was almost a little bit nervous when I picked up A Small Thing to Love, because I was afraid of all the expectations that your previous writing had set, and you met and exceeded the expectations. So that's
Thank
just
you.
fantastic. And I'm a
That,
big admirer.
thank you. That means so much to me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I thank you for taking the time to come here and talk to me, and I hope we get to do it again after your book of poetry comes out.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shuly. You take care and have a great weekend.
Thanks. You too.